001100111. Oh, didn't see you there. My name is Binary Large Object, but you can call me Blob for short. Okay, that's not actually my name. My name is Will, but today that's what I'm going to be presenting on, is blobs. So we're going to start with a quick presentation on blobs before we jump into our demo. Firstly, our categories are why choose blobs, the advantages of them, the drawbacks, and the alternatives. And the reason we're looking at them in general is because we're trying to look at ways to store images in SQL. So, why choose them in the first place? They contain the actual binary data that corresponds to your media. It doesn't have to be images, although that is what we're focusing on today. So they streamline many processes. And since they already have this binary data, they promote data integrity when you are performing database operations, such as atomic operations that we all know good and well are very crucial and vital to databases. And lastly, this binary data that contains information that pertains directly to the image can then support access through standard SQL queries. Now, some more advantages of blobs are through the security of them. Since they are binary data, administrators can then use security measures provided by whatever system they're using to control access to the blobs. And many RDBMSs support blobs or have a data equivalent that can be transferred to or from blobs. And they support convenient data integration across platforms since they are expressed as binary, which, if you don't know already, is kind of considered a universal language among computers. But they do have their drawbacks. So some quick disadvantages of blobs. They're very true to their name. They are binary large objects. So storage space is probably the biggest consideration when you're using them. And this large size of the blobs affects other storage related operations, such as backing up and restoring databases and data retrieval. So the more blobs that you have, the longer these processes are going to take. And some database systems do lack competent querying and indexing for blobs, which you will actually see later in our demo. And lastly, having blobs can actually have a negative effect on the security, even though they can have a positive effect. But this is assuming that database administrators do not secure the blobs correctly. And lastly, some quick alternatives to blobs. You could, in theory, store a reference to the image or media file. This has its own drawbacks, though. If the file path is changed, that becomes an issue with the database integrity. And there are different drawbacks for that as well. Obviously, the biggest advantage would be the fact that this definitely takes up less space than just having the actual blob there. So another approach that is very similar to this would be to store those references to the images using a cloud-based storage system, such as Amazon S3 or Microsoft Azure Blob Storage. And lastly, these aren't really necessarily alternatives, but similar to blobs like we were mentioning earlier. PostgreSQL has ByT, and Microsoft SQL Server has var binary. So let's get into our actual demo. Okay, so we are going to start in DB Browser and kind of show off the brute force methods as far as displaying and inserting blobs. So first off, we already have my sample data that's already here. And the idea is we have this sample database called profiles, and it has some very simple information such as primary key, profile ID, the name of the person who has the profile, and their picture. And obviously this is not informative at all, but if we actually double click on the record, it will show the picture that corresponds directly to the binary information that is also contained in the blob. So this is what's really in the blob, and all of this binary is what kind of composes the actual image. If we try to go to anything else here, it's just going to say, okay, try to switch to image or binary mode for displaying the information. So now what we're going to do is we're actually going to go ahead and just insert another record that contains a blob in the database. And here we're going to say name is 0, and we're going to have to actually insert the file. So we're going to import that. And for some reason it's saying text file. We don't want that. It's going to be I think it's a JPEG or PNG, regardless, JPEG. When we insert it, it's going to accept it. If it was a JPEG or PNG, either way, it was going to take it. And now we know that it also will display all of this binary data. But you can't really query well using DB browser when it comes to blobs in this system. So the best way to kind of do all of this in bulk, as far as displaying as well as inserting, is going to be using our good friend Python. So we're going to go ahead and close DB browser because that tends to help. We'll save the changes. It tends to help when you close DB browser when you're writing changes and doing all that good stuff. So now we're in PyCharm, and this is kind of the code that is going to correspond to actually inserting new blob records inside of our profiles database. So quick walkthrough. If you're not too familiar with Python code, we need to actually connect with this first line and open up the cursor as well. Then after we've done that, with the file actually open, we are going to read it into another variable called image underscore data. Now, after we've done that, we need to actually insert all of that image data into the database using our cursor that we opened earlier, using the connection, and we're going to execute that. The actual parameters will be heavy SQL, and then we're going to commit and close the transaction. So let's go ahead and run this. Click the run button. Seems to have succeeded successfully, but just to be sure, let's go ahead and reopen that profiles database. And when we open that up, it looks like it is indeed here. Let's make sure that the blob actually inserted correctly. And here it is, William Fancy Son III in all of his majesty. Okay, so now that we have done that, let's also go ahead and go into pick display. And here we're going to have a couple other special little import statements. We're going to have the Python image library importation, specifically image, since that is the only thing we're working with today. And then we're also going to have input output imported, and that's going to help with our byte conversion. So once again, we're going to go ahead and open up that connection to our database. That's going to be our first couple lines of code. And here, right around here, is where you might make this into a for loop instead, so that you could then iterate through all of the profile IDs to actually display all of them sequentially. So for all intents and purposes for this demo, we're just going to do one at a time, similar to how we did in the database. But I wanted to show this off because this would likely be a better option for you if you were actually going to apply this to a real world situation. You would want to have some sort of loop or iteration method before this SQL execution, so that you could then kind of make sure that you are fetching the blob data on command. So right now we've got profile ID 1. I don't know if you all remember, but that should correspond to Scary Terry, our little purple friend. So you'll go through here, and this is actually where you'll fetch the binary data from the SQL statement we already selected, but you need to actually then extract the binary data using cursor once again, and then you need to convert that binary data to an image object. So that's where the PIL library is going to come into play, and we're going to connect it to an image variable. Image will be the name of it, and then we're going to then display the image. Let's go ahead and run this. Once again, should be Scary Terry, our little purple friend. Pops up a new window. Boom. And here he is. And like I said, you could kind of change this and display whatever profile ID in the database that you wanted. So thus circling back to the fact that you would want to put something in these preceding lines to then make sure that you can fetch whatever profile is being requested to be fetched in the succeeding lines after it. Obviously, that then starts making things a lot more complicated, but I hope after today you have kind of gotten a good idea of what blobs are, how they are handled using SQL, and also how to display them and insert them into databases. Thank you for your time.